Picture this. You're standing at a major crossroads. The choice you make here is going to completely alter the trajectory of your life. But here's the catch. The logic and the evidence for both paths, they're in a complete agonizing stalemate. So what do you do when the evidence is exactly 50-50? I mean, do you just freeze up, flip a coin? Well, welcome to today's Explainer, where we're tackling this exact dilemma, but on a massive cosmic scale.
We're diving into a fascinating lecture by Dr. Jim Spiegel on the pragmatic justification of theistic belief. And honestly, it takes a totally different approach to the whole question of faith. You know, usually when we hear arguments for God, we're talking strict evidence, right? Cosmology, biology, historical records, the whole shebang. But this source material takes us down a totally different, intensely practical path. It asks a pretty startling question. Regardless of empirical proof, is it practically rational to believe?
To get there, we'll hit a few key stops. First, the demand for evidence. Second, Pascal's high-stakes wager. Third, defending that bet. Fourth, the will to believe. And finally, the reality that everyone is already a believer. Let's get into it. All right, Section 1, the demand for evidence. Now, before we can really grasp the pragmatic argument for faith, we've got to look at the philosophical hurdle it's trying to jump over. Enter William Clifford. He was a late 19th century thinker who laid down what's known as Clifford's principle. He argued that it is wrong, always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. And hey, at first glance, sounds pretty reasonable, right? Religious skeptics use this exact rule to argue that belief in God is inherently irrational, simply because, in their view, there's just never enough empirical proof.
But wait, here's the fascinating part. Scholars point out a massive self-refuting irony here. Is there actually sufficient evidence to prove that Clifford's principle itself is true? Think about it. What kind of empirical evidence actually proves that you must only use empirical evidence? Literally none. It turns out this rigid rule doesn't even satisfy its own strict demands. And you know, that realization completely opens the door to looking at belief through a totally different lens.
Which brings us to Section 2, Pascal's high-stakes wager.
Let's rewind to the 17th century and talk about the mathematician Blaise Pascal. He looked at that 50-50 stalemate of divine evidence, and he didn't see a dead end at all. He saw it as the ultimate casino bet. Pascal says, look, if you can't decide based on evidence, you've got to look at the payouts. If you wager that odd exists, and you're right, boom, infinite gain, eternal bliss. If you're wrong, well, it's just a mild loss. Maybe you missed out on some illicit fun and were slightly inconvenienced. But if you wager against God and you're wrong, that's infinite loss. And if you're right, just a mild gain. To really put this into perspective, let's just imagine a two-horse race. The God horse requires a $2 bet to win a massive $2 million payout. The atheism horse, well, that one requires you to risk $1 million just to win a measly $2. I mean, even if the odds of either horse winning are exactly 50-50, you would be an absolute fool to bet your life savings on the atheism horse. Pragmatically speaking, Pascal argues, you literally must wager on God.
Moving right along to Section 3, defending the bet.
Now, naturally, you might be a bit skeptical here. You're probably thinking, okay, but I can't just force my brain to believe something just because the payout is good. And fair enough. Philosophers like William Lycan, Arthur Schlesinger, and William James tackle this head-on. They admit you can't just snap your fingers and change a core belief on command. But you can use behavior therapy. Basically, you act the part. You go to church, you read, you pray, you build the habit over time, and eventually, a sincere belief naturally forms and takes root.
The lecture grounds this with a truly brilliant analogy. Imagine I offered you $50,000 if, exactly 1 year from today, you genuinely loved jazz music. Right now, let's say you absolutely despise it. You can't just instantly love it on command, right? But for 50 grand? Come on, you'd buy the Dave Brubeck and Miles Davis records. You'd read up on the history. You'd immerse yourself in the culture. And a year later, that cynical starting wager to just grab the cash, it would very likely blossom into a genuine, sincere appreciation for the music.
But what if the odds aren't exactly 50-50? What if atheism actually seems, I don't know, way more likely to you based on the evidence? Well, Lycan and Schlesinger argue that it ultimately doesn't even matter. Even if the God horse is a much slower 10-to-1 underdog, the infinite payoff still makes it the only rational bet. The sheer, mind-boggling math of eternity completely dwarfs whatever initial probability you assign to it.
Let's shift into Section 4, the will to believe.
So the physician-turned-psychologist William James stepped into this arena back in the late 19th century. He argued that it isn't just pure reason that forms our beliefs. Sometimes our passionate nature must step in where strict logic fails. He actually laid out 3 specific criteria for when it's rationally acceptable to let our passions decide. The choice has to be living, meaning it actually has some emotive appeal to you. It must be forced, meaning you can't just evade making a decision altogether. And it must be momentous, highly important, not trivial. And when you look at the religious hypothesis, the choice to believe in God, it hits all 3. It's a living, forced, and incredibly momentous decision.
And James highlights a really crucial point here. You cannot simply sit out the religious question. Deciding not to make a choice regarding God is effectively just choosing agnosticism or atheism by default. If we adopt an overly rigid rule, like Clifford's, that demands pure evidence, we might actually blind ourselves to potential truths that can only be discovered by taking a leap. And honestly, a rule that permanently prevents you from finding the truth is, ironically, a completely irrational rule.
Finally, Section 5. Everyone is a believer.
Now, if you're sitting there thinking that you navigate your daily life relying purely on strict logic and evidence, the 18th century philosopher David Hume is about to flip that completely upside down. Hume demonstrated that absolute empiricism is practically impossible. We all navigate life using what he called animal faith. Think about it. We believe that every effect has a cause. We believe the sun is going to rise tomorrow. We believe we're currently awake and not just stuck in some highly vivid dream. You don't have absolute, undeniable, empirical proof for any of these things, yet you commit to them fully, purely on faith, just to function in the world every single day.
And here is the real mind-bender. It is a known philosophical howler that no one has ever conclusively proven that there are minds other than one's own. Seriously, you just assume the people around you have rich, private inner thoughts just like you do, based on a remarkably poor inductive argument. You are literally reasoning from a sample size of exactly 1, yourself, to 8 billion other people. Yet we accept it as an absolute article of faith, every single day, without a second thought.
So, the lecture leaves us with this incredibly powerful synthesis. Faith isn't some weird anomaly. It's an unavoidable part of the human condition. Even the most hardcore, logic-driven atheist is walking around making massive, unproven faith commitments just to get out of bed in the morning. Which leads us to this final question. If you're already navigating your entire life based on undeniable, daily faith commitments, can you really reject the pragmatic wager of religious belief? It's a heavy thought to weigh the next time you ask yourself what it truly means to be a rational person. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.